InDigital is on a mission to improve the 911 industry. Our goal is to create something better to go above and beyond the current standards. Our passion for creating the most advanced, well-designed solutions led to our position as an industry leader in next-gen core services. For the millions of calls processed over our emergency IP networks, to our Text for 911 solution, Texty, to our disaster recovery and backup solution, Mevo, it's easy to see we love what we do. For more information, check us out at www.indigital.net.
Rapid Deploy believes that every public safety agency, regardless of size, should have access to the data they need when it matters most. That's why since 2016, our mission has been to reduce emergency response times and improve public safety. We are the industry's only integrated emergency response platform. Our web-based cloud platform includes analytics, mapping, dispatch, and mobile apps, purpose-built for 911 in the 21st century. Visit www.rapiddeploy.com to learn how we enable effective, efficient, data-driven emergency response.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital as well as Rapid Deploy, and as always, a big thanks not only to the sponsors, but to the patrons and all of you who watch, listen, and share and support. Thank you so very much. There's been a lot going on. We are pretty close to Thanksgiving, then to Christmas. Where I'm at in the Midwest, it is already snowing and everything, and it's freezing in the room that I'm in, but it's all good. There's so much stuff that's been going on, and I'm just so excited and blessed and honored to have so many amazing guests come on and share their stories. It's been excellent. 2020 has been a crazy year, but it has been really good either way. Like I said, I feel blessed and honored. So thank you all so much for everything. And we're going to go ahead and jump right in. You know, I usually have a story, something to go along with what's been going on with all the, the different episodes and stuff, but we're going to jump right into this one. And my guest today, I'm excited. My guest reached out to me and, was talking about how he wanted to share a certain story, something that's never been shared before. And just really to find out a lot about what he's doing, his background, his stories, public safety, just everything that's going on. So again, I'm excited to have him on, and his name is Michael Sugrue, and he is a retired police sergeant, former Air Force captain, as well as a mental health advocate. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
So we were going back a little bit. I've seen you email wise is what I'm getting at, and I've seen you on other podcasts. There's a lot of different things, especially on LinkedIn, that I see that you're doing and sharing, and a lot going on with mental health advocacy. And there's a lot of stuff that you have that's going on. So I'm honored to have you here so that we can talk about your story and just everything that you're doing.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, like I said, and I've never reached out to anybody for an interview, and there's a reason for that. And I have, my heart goes out to our dispatchers and our 911 call takers, and radio dispatchers, many people don't understand the job that they do. And more importantly, they don't understand the toll that that job takes. And me personally, I was one of those people who was completely ignorant to what exactly our dispatchers and call takers do and the effect the job has. And so through my career, but more importantly, through my recovery process, and we'll go into that after a very traumatic incident I was involved in, I started actually working with all first responders, firefighters, paramedics, police officers, and dispatchers. And that's really where my eyes were opened to what our dispatchers do.
Yeah, it's interesting how not just the public, but those out in the field sometimes don't realize everything that's going on in there. I remember, so I dispatched myself, on the line dispatcher, call taker, and supervisor. And when I first started doing this podcast, there was an officer, a good friend of mine, a deputy, and a real, how would I put it? I'll just go ahead and a real hard ass. Like he was hardcore. He was awesome. Former Marine and everything. Um, and he used to get upset sometimes when we would send him to a secondary channel to wait for to get his information back. And after listening to a few episodes, I remember he sent me a message and he says, I have found out more about what dispatch does in these few episodes than I have in my entire law enforcement career. Keep doing what you're doing. And kind of jokingly as well at the end, it was, now I know that you're not just sending me over to be a jerk. There's a reason for everything that you guys are doing.
Exactly.
Now, let's go back in time a little bit. And I want to learn more about you. How did you get into public safety to begin with?
It goes back to my childhood.
Mhm.
My stepfather, he's the one that raised me. He was ultimately a police lieutenant here in the Bay Area in a city. It's Richmond, which is one of the most dangerous cities in our nation. And at a very early age, I was exposed to what law enforcement is and what he did. And I actually started volunteering for the Sausalito Police Department at the age of 8 years old. And it was ever since then, I just got this desire and this drive. And I call it a calling because for me, I really felt like I was called to this profession. I didn't think of it as just a job or as a career, but I focused my life on helping others and serving people.
So it started out that far back. And there have been a lot of people that I've spoken to have said something similar. There was a gentleman that a good friend of mine out of South Carolina. His dad was the chief of police, and he remembers, and I don't remember what year this was now, but they were dispatching. He was dispatching as a kid out of their house because people would call there, and he's like, I would send them out. I would send my dad out and another guy that was working with him. And so I've been doing kind of a work from home dispatch type thing since that time all the way back, and it's always stuck with me. And I think that's how public safety is, right? Whether it be military or public safety, it kind of gets in your blood, and it's that urge to help other people that ends up sticking with you.
I couldn't agree more. And, I know it's different for everybody, but I think whether you're a firefighter, paramedic, a police officer, dispatcher, like you said, by nature, many times we are caretakers and we've been doing it our whole life. We're used to taking charge. We're used to making decisions. And sometimes, unfortunately, that goes all the way back to childhood trauma for many people. And that can be, a wide variety of things. It can be as benign as an emotionally distant parent. And it can be all the way up to an abusive, whether it be physically or sexually abusive parent or family member or some kind of traumatic incident that they were exposed to. And it just, becomes your nature of stepping up, taking charge, doing the right thing, overcoming adversity, being resilient. And those are all things that make us successful as first responders. And I didn't realize that until I got into my volunteer work and recently going to some programs that I went to. And I've really had some insights into my own personal life. But time and time again, I've seen it in the volunteer work that I do with fellow first responders. when they actually get the courage and the strength to share these things and talk about their career and the impact of the career and the impact of their childhood. And it takes a lot of courage to do those things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And, kind of thinking about myself as well back when I was a kid, growing up. Now, my dad wasn't in public safety. However, he was always helping out in the court system and also helping out with troubled youth. Up until the time that he retired, that was his thing. He helped out with um, troubled youth that were in gangs, and he would help get them, situated to get out of those gangs and just really go towards a different path. So seeing him do a lot of that stuff, um, that was a big inspiration as well to want to do a lot more on my own. Now, I kind of fell into dispatching, but it ended up being something that I just fell in love with. And I did it for 13 and a half years, and then went into the private sector of 911, and now doing what I do now full time, and sharing these stories. And just like you said, it definitely helps with it's therapeutic. It's therapeutic to share stories like this.
It is. And that's one of the biggest things I learned in my recovery process is that we have a culture among all first responders, and there's a stigma that prevents so many of us from sharing these stories. I mean, the funny stories, no problem. We can all share the funny stories and we can laugh about those. And more often than not, we actually overcome, tragic events and trauma, usually at the scene or right after, oftentimes with humor. And that's because the culture and the stigma prevents us from really just sharing our feelings and our emotions and talking about how something really affected us.
Mhm.
And, for the longest time, even as a police officer, until I started my volunteer work, I didn't realize that, paramedics, firefighters, dispatchers, that they're all affected the same way by the same trauma. I mean, I literally, for some reason, as a police officer, when I saw the paramedics and the firefighters, and they were always on the same calls, as far as the very just heinous, tragic calls. And I thought to myself, you know what? These are medical professionals. This is what they see. This is what they do. You can even equate that to our nurses,
Mhm.
to doctors. But this is what they see. This is what they do. This doesn't affect them. And for some reason, I truly believe that. And that's not the case. The case is that we are all human, and these things affect us in the same ways. But this culture, whether any kind of first responder, we have to almost be invincible. We have to be able to handle any call that comes in. We have to be able to go to any situation, not show fear. As a call taker, I know you have to keep people calm on the other end, but at the same time, you have to get this critical information that you have to give to the police officers that are going to the scene. And then you have to manage not only the people that are calling in, but the officers once they get there. And it's overwhelming. But the fact is that we are good at being operational and staying in control at the time in the moment. And then what happens is once that call's over, once we leave that scene, if we have any downtime, that's really when it starts to hit us. And it's just this constant exposure. And we're talking sometimes 30-year plus career
Mhm.
of just negativity, trauma. I know that for police officers, and this would be the same for dispatchers, since they're the ones taking the calls and handling the radio. But on average, in a career, a minimum of about 500 traumatic incidents, and that can be upwards of 800 traumatic incidents. And I think those are conservative estimates. I think it's much higher.
Mhm.
But we're talking about suicides, child deaths, fatal car accidents, domestic violence, you name it. And it's just constant. It's never ending. And it's from call to call to call to call. And we don't have that time, and we never take the time to decompress, to talk about it. I remember back to the field training program, after every call, we would talk about the call itself, the legal requirements, how are we going to write this report, things we could have done better. But we never, ever talked about the humanity of the call. And that's what it comes back to, is the humanity. We're dealing with other people whether it be at that scene or on the other line of that phone, on the other end of the radio. And for people that aren't involved in this line of work, it is just unimaginable the toll that this takes. An average non-first responder, just a normal citizen,
Mhm.
maybe 1 to 2 traumatic incidents in an entire lifetime. And yet we're talking about 500, maybe 800, maybe even higher in our career.
Man, that I don't know that I knew those stats. And just listening to you talk about this and think back to the amount of calls that I took in those 13 and a half years and how many of those were traumatic incidents. There's probably many that I have buried, and I'll be honest. There have been a few times where even now I've been out of dispatch for 7 years, and I'll be talking to my family, and like my siblings or something, and I'll just start talking about a call. There maybe I saw something that we had on TV or something happened, and it's something triggers it, and I start talking about it, and then I'll stop, and they'll say, "What's wrong?" I say, I just remembered that. Like I haven't thought about that call in years, but it's definitely there.
And the thing with that, with trauma and with these incidents, there's triggering events, and it can be as simple as a sound. Oftentimes, it could be a smell if you're on scene. But to this day, there's just certain incidents that I will never get out of my head. I mean, I still have nightmares. I still have difficulty sleeping. And like you said, sometimes I'll actually forget about an incident, and then all of a sudden it'll just pop up out of the blue, but it'll be so vivid that it was like it just happened. I mean, that's how strong of an impact that it has on us, and it leaves an imprint on us forever.
Right. Yeah, it does. It definitely does. And so if we can go back really quick, so you go, it starts at 8. You get older, you go into the military. When you get out of the military, you end up going straight into working for the Walnut Creek PD, right? You spent about 14 years there.
I did, correct.
So
Yeah,
then,
I actually did military police in the Air Force for about 6.5 years. And like I said before, my path was law enforcement. And so my original plan was to go into federal law enforcement, to actually go into the FBI. But through my work in the military, I realized that federal law enforcement is not as exciting as everybody makes it out to be.
mhm,
And so, literally, while I was still in the Air Force, technically, I was on use or lose. I was actually in the police academy, and I started right away. So there was really no break in separation as far as going from military law enforcement to civilian law enforcement. And I just knew that it was my absolute calling. I mean, I've had my whole life planned out
mhm.
since a child. And even when I started my military career, I had that planned out. And when I started my law enforcement career, I had that planned out. And I had a list of everything I wanted to do and everything I wanted to accomplish. And that did change. Things happened, and I didn't realize they were going to happen that way. And so I am medically retired for PTSD for what happened on the job. And oftentimes I speak about a major critical incident, but in reality, it's also a combination of just repetitive trauma throughout the career. And my whole thing was that I waited to ask for help. I waited almost 4 years to ask for help, and my life just absolutely spiraled downward to where I almost lost my life. And it took my friend trying to take his own life, which pulled me out of the darkness and got me the courage to ask for help. And I've been working on that. I've been in recovery for a couple years now, and I'm finally at a point now where I feel amazing, and I'm simply trying to give back. I'm trying to educate, obviously, first responders, dispatchers, firefighters, paramedics, police officers, but also the general public, our family members, our friends, our loved ones, so that they can help understand what we actually go through.
Your training from being in the military police to switching over, was there any difference there? And the reason I ask is because, so we're talking about all of these different these tools, that we use. And you were talking about early on about teaching to be human and such, and working with different situations. I mean, so was the training from military police different from being civilian? Was there any difference there? And I guess in some of those tools, did they help more, or was there lack thereof?
When I was in the military, we're talking 1998 to 2004, and
Mhm.
obviously, I know things have changed throughout the years, but just the fact of dealing military law enforcement versus civilian law enforcement, it is very different. You may go to similar calls, but the military is just structured in a whole different way. You're talking about it's all rank structured. Yeah, there are civilians on base, there's family members, there's spouses, but the majority of people on a base are in the military and they have rank. And in my case, I made it up to the level of captain and I commanded people and I supervised a lot of people. And it's different in the military. When you tell somebody to do something, usually they do it. I mean, there's times where they don't. It's more, I would say, black and white when you're talking about military law enforcement.
Mhm.
Also understand that I did a lot of other things like air base ground defense, nuclear security, anti-terrorism. And when you're talking about nuclear weapons and you're talking about, $1 million assets, things are just different. And so although we had our calls, we had alarm calls, domestic violence, suicides, occasionally there were deaths. The volume of calls, I would say in my own personal experience, and again, I'm only speaking from my personal experience, is a
Mhm.
lot less than on the civilian side. And I can even relate back to what we had was called a desk sergeant or dispatcher in the Air Force. And they were literally police officers that did dispatching. It wasn't like, their whole career was being a dispatcher. And they did a lot of other things besides dispatching. And their volume of calls was just a lot less. When you're talking about the civilian side, especially with the shorter staffing and less dispatchers, it's just constant, and it's totally different in that regard. And
Mhm.
I had to learn, a lot of different things. Like I had to learn more people skills. I had to learn more de-escalation. I had to learn how to talk to people differently, because as an Air Force officer, you tell somebody to do something. Like I said, usually they say, yes sir, no sir. And when you get in the civilian side and you're out there in the real world, well, the real world doesn't work like that. And especially
Right.
in today's climate, I mean, you're talking about a huge anti law enforcement sentiment where people literally hate law enforcement.
Mhm.
And, I never experienced that on the military side. And so even that alone makes it very different, a very different culture. It's just very different times.
I can see where that definitely would affect a lot of what you're doing. You go in to do this job where you're giving your life basically every single day to help others, and then there's that that possibility of someone just not liking you at all because of the shield that you have, the uniform that you wear, and it's it's got to weigh on the brain. It's got to weigh on you. There's so much stuff that's going on. You could go from having a call where you've saved a child, or there's an accident where a child has passed away, or anyone has passed away for that matter, and then you go to another call right after that, and someone is just in your face hating on you, and you're like, what is going on? Like, what am I doing here? Like, I've never dealt with that. Of course, because I was in dispatch. I dealt with it over the phone, people yelling at me and swearing at me, telling me that I need to just do my job and get somebody over there. So, there's a little bit of that, but, for yourself, just the way you're saying, it was a lot different. And there's so many other things that you have to, these obstacles that you have to navigate through.
Well, and the biggest thing that comes to my mind on the difference is that, when you're in the military, when you're on base or you're deployed, you're in combat, that's a set defined period of time and you're operational during that time. But when you come back from that or when you leave the base, you're not operational. You're not always on edge. You're not always looking around yourself. And so, the biggest thing I know right away is that even to this day that I'm retired, my heightened alertness and situational awareness, it is just nonstop. I mean, I am always scanning, I'm always looking. I'm always just, looking at people's hands, their pockets, any bulges. I'm wondering if there's any threats. Whereas in the military, it's like when I was off duty, I was off duty. Like I didn't think about that stuff. I wasn't worried about people attacking me or harming me.
Mhm.
That was never a consideration. I was operational and I could shut it off. Whereas on the civilian side, you can't shut it off. I mean, you're literally a cop 24/7. And in today's climate, now not only do you have to worry about your own safety, but you have to worry about, people knowing that you're in law enforcement, and then worried about your family members or people following you to your home, damaging your property or harming you or your family. And that goes into the current times that we're in today.
Mhm.
There's always been that heightened alertness, but I think now for our first responders, our police officers, it is much higher than it's ever been. And I just can't imagine, that we always have to look over our shoulders. And again, not just when you're on duty, but when you're off duty as well.
Right. And that just adds more of, like you said, more of that worry that comes with everything. There's one time that I experienced a little bit of that. I was with a friend of mine who worked for local city PD. Um, I had already left dispatch to go into the private sector, and I was doing some marketing for this 911 solutions company here in Indiana. But I was visiting him because he was being nice enough to get in his uniform on his day off, and I had to take some pictures of him by his cruiser and some other stuff that I was doing. Well, afterwards, he gets back in regular clothes, and I take him to lunch, and we're sitting towards the back of the restaurant, and I'm sitting there with him, and I'm just talking, not really thinking about anything else or anyone else that's there. And he's just, constantly looking around. If the door opens, he looks to see who's coming in, and if someone is coming in from or coming up from behind him, he's, looking off to the side. And I said, "Hey, man, are you all right? Like, what's are you waiting for someone?" Because I had never experienced that before. And then he explained to me, and I just sat there and I thought, all right, I apologize. Like I didn't think about that. So that was the one time that I actually experienced something like that, just from the outside looking in.
In a simple example, just like you're talking about, if I happen to go to a restaurant, I'm meeting somebody there, and God forbid they get there before I do, and they have the table and they're already sitting down, and now my back's to the door. I can't even begin to describe the anxiety I have. I mean, I literally have to say, "Hey, I'm really sorry about this, and I know it's going to sound weird, but do you mind if we switch seats, or do you mind if we switch tables?"
Mhm.
Because I will not be able to sit there knowing that door or huge window is right to my back. Like I literally have to be in a position where I can see the entrance and exits. I can see people coming and going. And it happens like so quick, and I'm so used to it that you don't realize it. But like you said, you observed it with your friend,
Mhm.
but we just do it constantly. And I can't tell you how exhausting and tiring that is. And it's not even a matter, like as an example, somebody walks in, you're in a restaurant. Yeah, I look up and I notice them, but I'm scanning them, and I'm still scanning them. And if somebody's moving in my peripheral vision, I'm looking at that, and any kind of movement or noise. God forbid somebody drops some plates or glass. I mean, I immediately go from like calm to just extreme alertness, like what is going on. And it just becomes second nature that you don't even realize you're doing it.
So then you're in your career then, throughout the time that you were that you made it all the way up to, sergeant there at the PD and everything. Did you have, I guess, a lot of these situations that were going on, or maybe just from different calls that you were out on? Did you yourself or did others notice some changes in you? Did you notice some changes? Like what is wrong? Like what is going on?
Well, I mean, as far as I noticed, my friends noticed changes pretty early on becoming a police officer.
Mhm.
Just my demeanor, I guess how serious I was all the time, and I didn't joke around as much. Um, I didn't like to be around a lot of people. I didn't like to be in large gatherings. I stuck kind of to a close circle of friends or family members. Whereas before in the military and college, I was extremely social. I was in a fraternity. I was doing sports. I was just involved in everything. And it's kind of like when I started civilian law enforcement, my world got a lot smaller. And I found that on my downtime, I really didn't want to do a lot. I enjoyed just doing nothing and kind of just vegging out.
Mhm.
And this is early on in my career before any kind of like major trauma, if you want to call it that. But I was talking to someone the other day, and literally in my first 2 weeks of the field training program, I had two very traumatic incidents that at the time I didn't absorb it. I really didn't. I mean, I just kind of pressed on through them. And I knew at that time I couldn't show weakness. I couldn't show that it bothered me. And I even remember my field training officer joking about it, and I joked right back. And that's where I learned that, we don't talk about this stuff other than joking about it.
Mhm.
And, my very first 2 weeks, very briefly, one of them was an elder lady. She had been burnt up in a condo. They weren't sure if it was an accident or a homicide. And I had to go to this autopsy. And I'm literally in this room. I'm seeing a human body that's just charred, horrible smell, skin's falling off. I'm seeing this body being cut open. I'm seeing organs. I mean, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And as I'm sitting there just trying not to pass out from the sight and the smell, because I have to show like, hey, this is no problem. I can do this and nothing bothers me. And we're sitting there in the corner. He sees something faintly down the woman's throat, and he can't see what it is, but eventually pulls out a rag. And it turns out that the son-in-law had knocked this woman out, stuffed a rag down her throat, and then set the house on fire. And I mean, you want to talk about exposure to just pure evil. Literally on the first or second week of training, I mean, that incident to this day just sticks with me forever. And just images I can't get out of my head. And nobody should have to see anything like that. I mean, it's not normal. And another call, which happened right after that, was a suicide attempt. And I got there before any paramedics or fire personnel. And I remember I was there with my FTO, and it was a young lady. I believe she was in her early 20s that tried to kill herself. The mom answers the door. And my FTO, I go over there and he's like, look, you got to keep talking to her. You got to keep her calm. The paramedics are coming, but I need you to like, just keep her calm. And so this woman, she had slashed her entire neck, and I could actually see the fat in her neck, and it looked like her neck was going to fall off. But the strangest thing was this woman was completely calm, but yet she was talking about how she was possessed by the devil. And it was, I mean, it was like something out of a movie, like something you can't even believe is actually happening in front of you. And I mean, that's just two very simple examples of like my first 2 weeks on the job, not to mention the countless other calls. But when you think about that, and I look back to that, and all I remember thinking to myself is that you can't show weakness. You can't show this bothers you. You just have to get through this and press on to the next one and try to forget about it. And, you can't talk about it. Again, you just joke about it, and that's how you get through it. And, but again, after a full career of just call after call after call, it just takes a toll. Now, I didn't see a dramatic change until after my major critical incident, which was an officer involved shooting where I had to kill somebody with a butcher knife that was trying to kill a couple and then try to kill me. And immediately after that is when my life started to just spiral downward big time. And it also led to just a bunch of other chain events, including a federal lawsuit that drug on for almost 4 years. My marriage started falling apart. I mean, just everything was going to shit. And that's really when I knew that something wasn't right. But even then, knowing that, I didn't ask for help. I didn't reach out. And there were some key administrative betrayal things that happened that really, instead of me getting the help, it sent me down the wrong path of self-destruction. And administrative betrayal is a huge factor and role in our health, in our mental health, and our physical health. And that applies to dispatchers, the line officers. It applies to everybody. We have to have the support of our agencies and the people within them. If we don't trust them, we don't trust them enough to talk about this stuff and go to them, why would we ask them for help unless we're sure they're going to give it to us?
Yeah. So it, you bring me to a spot where I remember something not completely similar. It was, and it wasn't that we didn't trust our admin after, something that had happened, but the help that we ended up getting wasn't really, I guess, the help that we were expecting. So I'm sure that the counselor who was there is great at what he does. However, he doesn't come from public safety at all. So he didn't know how to really talk to us. It was myself and two other dispatchers there, and we he asked what was going on, and we told him what happened. And the first thing he asks is, "Well, how does that make you feel?" And then we're just kind of sitting there, like, "Okay, um, peace." That's we're gonna go back and do what we got to do. So it was. I don't know. I don't even know how to explain it, but it wasn't what we were looking for, and it wasn't what we needed at the time. What worked more was us talking to each other and the other officers that we worked with. That right there was way more than anything that gentleman could have helped us with. Again, I'm sure that he was excellent at his job. It's just it wasn't for what we needed at that time.
Yeah, you absolutely have to have culturally competent therapists. I mean, that's number one. You have to have them because normal therapists have no clue what we go through. But I also have to throw myself on the sword here and tell you that as an officer, as an eventual supervisor and a sergeant, I had no clue what our dispatchers were going through.
Mhm.
And part of that is the mentality. I know that's changing because our dispatchers are first responders. And I know that there's a lot of movement that's being made to support that. But when you talk about, now we're talking 2004, so we're talking like 16 years ago, that wasn't the case. And
Yeah.
people didn't look at dispatchers as first responders and they didn't understand it. And, I feel ashamed, but I didn't understand it until I started working with dispatchers, not on my job as a police officer, but once I sought help and going through first responder retreats, first responder support meetings, and actually really getting to know the people, the dispatchers, really listening to what their experience and how they're feeling. Because, when you're working in the agency, everyone's so understaffed, they're overtasked, they're just so busy. How often do we really get to know our people? And I'm not talking about on the surface, I'm talking about know our people. When
Mm.
we know something's not right, when something's off, and we're so quick to punish our people, but we're not quick to find out, wait a minute, let's take a step back and find out, why has this person been late, 5 times this month? Why are they starting to drink more? Why did this person get this DUI? We just want to hammer them instead of getting to the root of the problem. And so, I think there needs to be a lot of education done across the board, but I think it's important that officers, if any officers are out there listening to this right now, you do have to get to know your dispatchers, not on a superficial level. I screwed that up. And even in the major incidents I was involved in, I could remember thinking to myself, and this was the incident where I almost died and my partners almost died. And we had a critical incident debrief afterwards, which, we did, but nobody really shared anything big because, it's the stigma, it's the culture. So everybody's like, okay, go around. I'm good. You're good. Okay. Yeah. But I remember thinking at the time, why is the dispatcher here in this critical incident debrief? They weren't there. They didn't almost die. This guy with the butcher knife didn't almost stab them. And I feel so bad for saying that. And I feel so guilty. And this is part of the reason why I wanted to be on the show, because I need people to hear me and I need them to understand what I'm saying, because I know it's going to resonate with some people out there
Mhm.
about. And what I need to also tell you is that at this time, and it's since changed, there was only one dispatcher on duty when my incident happened. It was the night after Christmas. The incident happened 3 a.m. And it turns out that this lady who was a victim and this guy was trying to kill her, she had called but got transferred to the wrong dispatcher and went to the fire department, which handles medical calls, because they thought somebody was choking. But no, it turns out that this guy with a knife was trying to kill her. And so it gets transferred to my dispatcher. And I didn't hear this actual dispatch tape until a court proceeding like 5 months later. And I can't begin to tell you how heinous and horrible that call was. And the fact that not only was she handling that call, but she was giving us information, she was handling the radio, she was fielding 911 calls that were coming in. I mean, she was literally the call taker and the dispatcher, and she was doing it all by herself. And I also didn't think about the fact of she knew she was sending us into a potentially deadly situation where we might die. And she had no choice. She's literally sending us to this call. And I remember when I heard this dispatch tape of the radio transmissions and just the panic that I heard in her voice. And I'd never heard any kind of panic from her like this before. And she was a phenomenal dispatcher, phenomenal. And I can't tell you how that made me feel. I mean, but she kept her calm, she kept her cool, she gave us the information she needed. But once that happened, she got stuck in dispatch for hours without relief because everybody's at the scene. Everybody's worried about the officers. Everybody's getting called in. And you know, where was the priority of thinking about her? And it is messed up. She's no longer a dispatcher. And I can't imagine the toll that this incident alone took on her. Knowing that we got sent in there, knowing that we almost died, knowing that we killed somebody. And she didn't know, come to find out when I talked to her later, she didn't know who got shot, what happened. There was a long period where she didn't know if we were hurt, if we were injured, if we were dying. And she had to sit there with that. Meanwhile, and field all these calls and make all these notifications. So she's fielding calls. She's making notifications. I mean, it's just unimaginable what she went through. And I know for a fact that she didn't get the support that she needed. And that's because of the mentality and it's the understanding of the officers and the dispatchers or the call takers. I know it now, but I didn't know it then. And I'm a smart guy. I'm not saying that to brag. I've been very successful, but I can't believe how dumb I was when it came to understanding what our dispatchers do and what they go through. I mean, I'm ashamed. I'm literally ashamed. And I'm trying to give back now. I'm trying to make a difference. And there's 2 programs that I volunteer for that help dispatchers. And that's how I'm trying to make up for it. I'm trying to do better because I messed up. And it's all about understanding. It's all about just realizing that they are as exposed as we are. It's simple as that. Sometimes it's worse. Hearing it, but not seeing it and not knowing what's happened. Talking to these dispatchers who have literally heard people commit suicide on the other line of the phone, who have literally heard the voices of dying people, whether it be children's or spouses in a DV incident. Can you imagine that? No. As an officer, we don't get that part of it. Yeah, sure, we're in dangerous situations, but it is just as traumatic, if not more. And I don't think, at least I didn't get it. I didn't understand that. I didn't have that concept. And it's important that people get that. That's why our dispatchers are first responders. They are the front line. They're the ones that make the first contact if it's a call coming in. And they literally have to make life and death decisions in split seconds, just like we do. It's simple. It's period. Simple as that.
Damn. I couldn't say it any better. that is you're correct. That is exactly right. There's a lot of people who don't understand this. You know, there's we had a couple times where officers would come in and they would help us with certain things. Just as an example, wires and trees down from a bad storm. They were in there for maybe 30 minutes or so, and they were like, okay, I'm out. I don't know how you guys are doing this, how you're answering all of those calls and still doing this and checking in on us. I have no idea. And we'd say, this is what we do. And we just continue on. And the amount of The calls that come in, it all sticks with us. We go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And it's exactly how you put it there. Our minds create something that's probably worse than what is actually going on the at the incident. And because we can't see it, we can only hear it. And then when a line is open up and all you hear is screaming or whatever in the background, it just starts to create our own story, and we're typing it in unknown situation to whichever area in the county, head out over there, and we just continue and continue and continue and continue. And then we get a situation to similar to what you're talking about, something that you dealt with, and we start listening to voices. We start listening to the voices of our officers who they're on scene, to pick out, to narrow down who is the one who might be hurt.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way it works. And in doing this podcast and talking to different people, I didn't realize that in the beginning that was stuff that we were doing until someone said it to me. I thought, no shit, you're right. We do that. We hear their voices. We've got someone who yells, shots fired or whichever, and it's a hush, and we just start working. But then you're listening to voices. Who is that? Okay, that's this person. That's this person. Shit, I haven't heard from this other person yet. Are they hurt though? Are they hiding? What is it that's going on? And sometimes we would be part of the debriefings, and other times it's why do they need to come over here? And it sucks. And you saying all of this, it's amazing to hear from you, and it's just, you realized in all of this that was going on. I mean, you listened to the call and you had no idea. And you wonder, how are they dealing with it? How did it come out? You mentioned how there was the debriefing and there was some wonder, why is this person there? What came out of that though? Like, did it, at the end of it, did it seem like that it worked, hearing maybe from her, or did any of that even happen? Because like, as we're talking about right now too, there's that stigma. Nobody wants to look weak. I was one of those as well. I used to bury my calls. I didn't talk about them. And I learned the hard way that it's better to talk about them than bury them, because I was basically an asshole at home because I didn't know how to get those out.
Again, I'm speaking for myself, but the debrief, sure, it was helpful, but the issue is that none of us really expressed our emotions, our feelings, and that's because we just didn't feel comfortable doing that. And so, if you're going to have a debrief, it has to be in a trusted environment with trusted people, with a trusted, culturally competent therapist. But this goes into the culture and the stigma, and it has to be acceptable to talk about that, to take a step back and say, okay, I want to let you know how this affected me, when you did that or this happened, and here's how I felt. And, specifically from the dispatch point of view as well. And it is critical. Dispatchers need to be involved in the critical incident debriefs, period. I'm just going to put it out there, period. If there's a critical incident debrief or a major incident, those dispatchers involved, they need to be in the debrief, period. It's simple as that. And in this case, there was a dispatcher there, but I can't speak to all critical incident debriefs because we're talking about a major event for my agency, but they weren't always involved in critical incident debriefs at the time. I don't know about now. I mean, I'm sure things have gotten better for my agency, and I'm sure they're more involved. But I do know there's still lots of agencies out there that don't include dispatchers. They don't even think about it. It doesn't even cross their mind. I think what comes to mind, honestly, by most administrators and supervisors, who's going to cover dispatch? Wait a minute, if dispatch is in the debrief, who's going to cover dispatch? We're already short staffed. We're already paying this overtime. People are already holding over. I get that. Like, there's logistics, there's things that have to happen. There has to be staffing, but we're talking about our people's lives. We're talking about their mental health. And that is what needs to be a priority. And it hasn't been. It's changing for the better across the board. And that's why it's so important that we recognize our dispatchers and call takers as first responders, because they are, and they need the same protections, the same coverages, whether it comes to work comp, or whether it comes to time off, or whatever the case may be, they need to be treated the same as our line level officers that are at these incidents. It's that simple.
Mhm.
And for me, I remember that all of us were in such a hurry to go back to work, me specifically, that we were back to work within 2 weeks of this fatal shooting. I think the dispatcher, though, was back to work like right away. I don't think the dispatcher, in fact, I know the dispatcher didn't get offered the time off like we did. And I hope that's still not the case for agencies out there, but I have a feeling that it probably is, because people look at it as like, okay, you're involved in an officer involved shooting, whether you were a shooter or you were there, you're going to usually be placed on admin leave, go through an interview process, IA, DA interview. And I get some of this doesn't apply to dispatchers, but mental health does apply to our dispatchers,
Mhm.
and they will need time off. And I can't imagine if an officer dies or gets killed, they may never come back from that call. They may never come back from that incident. And that's why we have to address these things. We have to make it okay to talk about this stuff. And it has to be across the board. It can't just be one group of employees within an agency. It has to be for everybody. And, when I'm talking about this, so back then it was like, we're going to check this box. We're going to get through this debrief. We're going to do it and we're going to move on. And I remember a lot of debriefs were like that. It was kind of like, oh, it's hassle. We have to go talk to this person. So everybody would get in there and you go around. You're good? Okay. Yeah, you're good? Yeah, you're good. Okay. Okay. You guys need anything? No, we're all good. Okay, cool. No, we're not all good, and maybe, you know what? Some of those people truly were okay, because things affect people differently. They do.
Right.
One incident can seem minor to somebody, but to another, it can be so over the top, it can have devastating effects. And a simple example is a child death call. Those are horrible for everybody. But until I was an actual parent, it had much more effect on me once I was a parent. I remember to this day a child death call I went to where a little girl who looked like the age of my daughter at the time died right in front of me. And I will never forget that call. And I know that would have upset me when I was a brand new officer, but I wasn't a father. I didn't have a daughter, And so a lot of times what has happened in our personal life, and I'm not talking just childhood, I'm just talking our entire life. We're all different. We've all experienced different things. And because of that, these interactions, these calls, these incidents, they're all going to affect us differently. And so we can't sit back and judge another person and say, well, no, wait a minute. You weren't there. You didn't almost get stabbed with this knife. So this couldn't have affected you like it did me. You're in a room. You're in a safe room where nobody can hurt you with your phone and your radio. You didn't almost die. But no, the thing is that in their head, you almost died. And it was going to be their fault, or it was their fault. Or the person that did die, that's their fault too, because they didn't do something right. They could have done something different. And now they're second guessing themselves. And they have to live with these things when it's not even their fault. These fatal, tragic incidents, it's not their fault. And they feel helpless because they're doing what they can, but they couldn't save this person. And so they're living with that the rest of their life, just like I'm living with the fact that I killed another human being. It doesn't matter that I saved lives. It doesn't matter that it was legally justified and that, we got sued and we prevailed. It doesn't matter. I took a life. I have to live with that. So when you're a call taker or a dispatcher and something happens on the end, you're going to blame yourself.
Yep.
Even though you couldn't have done anything different, you're going to blame yourself. Because why? Because you're human. I'm human. And it's horrible. So let's talk about that.
Right. And that's very true. My last 2 weeks in dispatch before I switched careers, it seemed like the dispatch gods were giving me every shit call on the way out. And there was a suicide call that started out as a disorderly. And at the very end of the call, my caller says, I think the person's suicidal too. And I'm thinking, okay, that completely changes the entire call, the entire priority of this. I get already had the person's, information, the a phone number, vehicle description, everything. Switch it around, tone it out, saying that this person is also suicidal. and I'm trying to call this person, and the phone is ringing. But as it starts ringing, there's a line that's coming in as well, a 911. We're so busy in there, nobody can pick up that phone. So I hang up on the call of me trying to reach this person, pick up the phone, and the caller tells me that they just witnessed a car go straight into a tree.
Mm.
And I asked if they could safely see if that person was okay. We were gonna get help out there, and I asked for the vehicle description, and the caller had told me there's no way that this person could have lived through this, and I said, "Okay, if you can call out to them just to see if they answer." And when I got the vehicle description, I basically lipped what it was because it was that person that I was trying to get a hold of, and he did die. But for me, I started blaming myself then because I thought, "Well, what if I could have changed my line of questioning? If I would have changed my line of questioning in any way, would I have had enough time to get a hold of this person?" I literally was looking at the map and trying to map out how much time it would have taken for him to get there. And from the time that I was on the phone, and if I would have gotten on the phone, I spent like 30 minutes trying to figure this out until I finally realized there was nothing I could have done. He was probably already into the tree when I was trying to call. And but that was one of those things, just like we're talking about. I was putting it on me. I was blaming myself, like, damn it, if I would have done something different, maybe I would have saved this person. But that wasn't the case.
Absolutely. And it takes a toll. I mean, obviously you didn't forget about that, and you probably never will forget about that. And that's one call of I don't know how many thousands and thousands of thousands of calls that you took,
Mhm.
right? And you're never going to forget that among I'm sure many others.
Right.
And people just don't realize the impact this has on us, and it stays with us forever. And man, it's just we got to help our people. We got to take care of our people. I mean, now more than ever. I mean, our people need our help more than ever. You know, they don't unfortunately they don't track the suicide rates of dispatchers. I know they're trying to do it for firefighters,
Mhm.
but for law enforcement, the numbers are through the roof. The simple fact is that as a police officer, you are much more likely to die by your own hands than the hands of another. It's that simple.
Wow.
Last year, we had 228 law enforcement suicides. And I'm not sure what the number is up to this year. I think we're up to 154 as of today, law enforcement suicides. And I can tell you that working with all first responders, that what I just said, that you're much more likely to die by your own hands than the hands of another, that applies to all first responders. It applies to firefighters, paramedics, police officers, and I would even add dispatchers to that. It's the simple fact that we see, hear, experience things that nobody else should have to. And we're doing it for prolonged periods of times over many, many years, and we're not addressing it. And so that's why I do what I do. It's to smash the stigma. It's to save lives. It's to bring those numbers down.
And it's needed for sure, just like you're saying. And you were talking about a couple of programs that you're involved in, now with the different stuff that you do. What are some of those programs as we start to go into the wrap up of this episode?
So the first program I went to, and I went through as a client back in May of 17, it's called the West Coast Post Trauma Retreat. It's short WCPR, a lot of people call it, and it's over a umbrella called the First Responder Support Network. And so the West Coast Post Trauma Retreat, it's a week long residential retreat for all first responders. So dispatchers, paramedics, firefighters, police officers. It's peer driven, but there's also clinicians as well, and there's chaplains. And the way it works is it's a mix of dispatchers, firefighters, and cops. Now there's 6 clients at a time. And then the meat and potatoes is about 20 or more peers. And the peers are people like me who have been through the program as a client.
Mhm.
And they've either gone through 6 months ago, some have gone through like 12 years ago. And so you have varying tenures, you have varying professions. So you always get a mix of dispatchers, paramedics, firefighters, cops. And then you've got chaplains who also work for fire departments, police departments. And then you have clinicians who literally, everybody volunteers for this program. So these clinicians and therapists, they close down their private practice for a week to go to this program. It's part educational, it's an experience, it's therapeutic. It's absolutely life-changing. This program does cost money. Usually, like when I went through work comp, paid for it. A lot of agencies will pay for it. They do scholarships as well. But it's priceless, I have to tell you. And I go back time and time again. But literally, if you could imagine these 6 clients who have never met and they're meeting for the first time, they're from all over the world, primarily from all over the United States, but they do get clients from all over the world. And in a matter of just a couple of days, these clients are able to share something so private, so deep, they've never shared their entire life. I mean, I'm talking even with their spouses oftentimes or family members, and they're able to share it in a room full of people that they literally just met a couple days earlier. So you can imagine that trust, the power and the strength of something like that, where like for me, I worked my entire career and I didn't have one person in my agency that I felt that comfortable talking to, that I could share those kinds of things. And I'm talking, people that have been abused, people that have had things happen to them. They've never shared it with anybody. And they've had this burden just sitting on their back and their shoulders their entire life. And it's just ripping at them and taking them a toll. And now they've lifted this off. And the thing that this does is it opens that door. It opens the things that need to be worked on or need to be addressed. And it starts the true journey of recovery. It's not necessarily a cure-all or fix-all, but what it does is it starts that process.
Yeah.
I truly believe this particular program, in that 1 week, you get more done than a full year of conventional therapy. And what it does do is when you go to therapy afterwards, it makes it that much more useful. And so just an amazing program. But again, the West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat. Now, the First Responder Support Network, they're the ones that oversee that retreat, but they also do educational, they teach classes, they do outreach. But if you just Google either one of those things, it will come up. You'll see it. I can't recommend enough. It's absolutely life-changing. It changed my life. And every time I go back, I see it change others. It's an amazing program. The other one I actually just went to this program in August. And I had already been in recovery for a couple of years. I'd gone to West Coast. I go to therapy, first responder support meetings. But this program, I didn't realize the power it was going to have. It's called Save a Warrior. This one's different in the fact that it's also open up to military, active military, and veterans, but it's also open to all first responders. So again, dispatchers, cops, paramedics, firefighters. About a week-long residential. This one, though, doesn't cost a penny. It's free. It's 100% funded by donations. So there is no financial barrier to going to this program. Literally, you just have to get yourself to one of 2 locations, which is in Southern California or Ohio is where they have the 2 campuses where they do this program. This one is peer-driven. They call it cohorts. It's bigger groups. Instead of the 6, you might have 10 to upwards of like 16 cohort members at a time. This one focuses on complex PTS or post-traumatic stress. And the one thing we haven't gone into, I like to call it post-traumatic stress injury as opposed to post-traumatic stress disorder. And I really push for that because it is an injury caused by cumulative trauma. And studies have shown that there is a physical and chemical change to the brain. And also I know firsthand, because I'm living proof, that you can get better. You will never be the same person before trauma, but you can get better 100%, but you have to do the work. And so this program, back to that Save a Warrior, what it does is it focuses on the childhood trauma. It focuses on things that you've been dealing with your whole life that you didn't realize were affecting you. Maybe it's just your personal relationships. Maybe it's like a fear of abandonment because you had an emotionally distant parent. But these things take a toll. And like I said, believe it or not, most first responders, and they're not going to want to hear this, but they have some kind of childhood trauma. It doesn't have to be anything major. In some cases it is. which affects their life. It shapes who they are, and it draws them to being first responders, to doing this work. And so when I went down to Save a Warrior, I was expecting to hear these combat stories and street stories, and they made it very clear. None of those stories were shared. It was all about that complex PTS. And the way it works is, this is your childhood trauma. This is your work-related trauma. So you need to lift this off and get to this. And once you deal with that, it's going to help you deal with the work-related trauma. But just an amazing program. They have a Facebook page, which is really active. You can go check it out. The process to apply for Save a Warrior, it takes less than 5 minutes. You do it right online, and somebody will call you from the program. They set up, it's called a rostering call, and that's how the process works. And you have a phone interview. If they think you're a good fit, you get accepted, and you're put on a wait list, and you go to the program. But both these programs, I needed both, and I think both are extremely beneficial in different ways, but absolutely life-saving, life-changing. The West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat, which I didn't mention, they have them in California. They're starting to grow. I believe Oregon, Washington, Arizona, out in the Midwest, I think Kansas or Oklahoma, but they're starting to spread out. And so again, just Google West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat and Save a Warrior, both phenomenal programs.
Perfect. It's been very eye-opening and amazing to have you on this episode. Just hearing you talk, your passion, your recovery, these programs, your view on dispatch, just everything has been refreshing. Thank you so much for being on. And for anyone who wants to get a hold of you, through social media, email, or anything like that, how can they get a hold of you to learn more about what it is that you do? And also, any speaking engagements that you might have, virtually, of course, right now, there's not a lot of in-person stuff, but either way, how can people get a hold of you?
The best platform is LinkedIn. I'm on there every single day. I have a huge following there, but I'm always posting, whether it be educational articles or just awareness things. I also post all the podcast interviews I do there. So they can send me a message on there, a connection request. I'd be happy to accept it. Again, I check that every single day, multiple times a day. I also manage a Facebook page. It's called First Responders First, and an Instagram page with the same name. So First Responders First. You can check that out. Again, I put interviews on there, articles related to PTSI or suicide prevention. And those two pages are for all first responders, not just law enforcement, but dispatchers, paramedics, firefighters. I'm also working on a book with a renowned psychologist. Her name is Shauna Springer, and she's been working with combat veterans for years and years and years. She's actually already an author. And so we're doing a book together, which is going to talk about my personal journey all the way back from childhood through my career. But more importantly, it's also going to have educational and awareness information from a psychological standpoint. And she is absolutely amazing. So I also recommend that you check her out on social media. She's also on LinkedIn, but her name is Shauna Springer, and just amazing woman doing amazing things. And, again, I'm just trying to get the word out there. And once this whole COVID thing is over, I'm hoping the in-person speaking engagements ramp back up, because I really like getting out there and speaking to people and talking to people.
I'm a firm believer that there is power in storytelling, and it just takes that first step. That first step is sharing. Like you were saying, it takes a lot of courage to share a lot of these stories, a lot of stuff that sometimes is buried. But once you share and share often, you're able to manage it a little better. At least in my experience and others that I've spoken to, it's been that way. And just listening to your story and everything that you're doing, like I said, there's that power in storytelling. And this is you going off and doing all of these different things. So I commend you on what you do. I applaud you. And thank you so much for being such a big advocate, and also a fan of dispatch. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I appreciate it, man. It's been an honor having you on the podcast.
It's my honor as well. And I just want to leave with one thing, and just remember that you're not alone. There is help. There is hope. You just have to have the courage to ask for it. And just please ask for help if you need it.
Exactly. Thank you so much once again for being on, and let's smash the stigma together, man. Let's continue doing this. I think we might have another episode in us in the future, and I look
Absolutely.
forward to having you on. So I'll be right back here with you. And for those who are watching and listening, if you have any comments, questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us, and that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. That is at 91 Podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/Within the Trenches Podcast. This episode has been sponsored by Indigital as well as Rapid Deploy. And if you're looking for any bonus content, you can check us out on patreon.com/WTT Podcast. This video can be seen on Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as YouTube. And then for the audio version of this, you can hear it 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone.